My friends always said I smile like a fox who's up to no good, that the way my eyes crinkle can make a girl's knees go weak. I wholeheartedly agreed. Hey, handsome, you got a minute? I looked up. A woman in a black slip dress stood bathed in the bar's dim, honey-colored light. She had lips painted blood red and eyes that glittered like a pair of stars. For you, always. I patted the empty seat beside me. Want to hear a dirty joke I just made up? She laughed, revealing two small, sharp canines. I'm all ears. What's the difference between a programmer and a prostitute? I leaned in close, my lips brushing her ear. A prostitute will say, let's try a different position, but a programmer will say, let's try a different algorithm. She roared with laughter, doubling over and nearly spilling her drink on my jeans. I seized a moment, wrapping an arm around her waist. Careful, these are expensive. How? Expensive. So expensive you'll have to help me take them off. And just like that, I was talking to this girl, Isabel, until last call. At 3 a.m, we were standing outside her apartment building, her fingers twisted in my tie. Want to come up for coffee? I don't drink coffee. I smirked, but I can watch you drink it. The next morning, I woke up to a headache that felt like an elephant had used my skull for a trampoline. Isabel was gone. On the nightstand sat $500 bills and a note. Great technique. I'll call you again. I stared at the cash, caught between laughter and tears. 28 years on this earth, and I'd just been paid for sex for the first time. I'd been treated like a gigolo. I figured it was just a one-night stand, a crazy story to tell. Until 2 months later, when Isabel showed up at my front door, a barely there bump showing under her dress. I'm pregnant, she said. It's yours. The smirk on my face froze and shattered. That's not funny. I'm not joking. She handed me a printout from a doctor's office. The OBGYN says it's been 8 weeks. I did the math. It was from that night. My mind went blank, and the first thing that stumbled out of my mouth was, how much do you want? Isabel's expression turned to ice. You think I came here for money? She pulled a checkbook from her designer bag. How much do you want? I'll write you a check. It was only then that I noticed the Patek Philippe on her wrist and the Jimmy Choos on her feet. Oh, hell. I'd slept with a rich girl. So, what do you want? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. To get married, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. We'll go to City Hall tomorrow. And that's how I, Ethan Hayes, inexplicably became a married man. The wedding was held at the plaza, attended by 200 people, none of whom I knew. Isabel was a vision in a custom Vera Wang gown. I stood beside her in a rented tux, feeling like a stray dog that had wandered into high society. Where are your parents? I asked her. My father's the one giving the speech, she said, nodding at the middle-aged man on stage. My mother's dead. That's when I learned my new father-in-law was one of the city's biggest real estate tycoons, worth billions. And I, a junior account manager at an advertising firm, was now married into the dynasty. Married life was more surreal than I could have imagined. We moved into Isabel's penthouse, or rather, the wedding gift from her father, a sprawling 4,300 square foot duplex on the Upper East Side. The first night, I stood in the middle of the living room, feeling like a monkey who'd accidentally stumbled into the Met. Do you like it? Isabel asked, wrapping her arms around me from behind. It's too big, I said honestly. I need Google Maps to find a bathroom. She laughed and pulled me toward the stairs. You'll get used to it. Get used to it? The toilet was a smart model that played classical music every time I used it. Don't even get me started on the bathtub, which could fit 10 people. I nearly drowned the first time I tried it. Why me? I asked her one night. With your money, you could have any guy you want. Someone 100 times better than me. Isabel was painting her nails, not even looking up, because they're all so boring. You're different. You tell dirty jokes. That's it. And she finally looked up, her eyes dangerously bright. You're handsome. Good genes. I was speechless. So that's what this was. I was a prize stallion, chosen for breeding. Around the 4th month of her pregnancy, the morning sickness hit her hard. I come home from work every day to find her heaving her guts out in the bathroom. Should we hire a nurse? I suggested. No, she said, shaking her head weakly. I want you to take care of me. So I started learning to cook. My first attempt nearly burned the kitchen down. Isabel stood amidst the wreckage, laughing so hard she couldn't stand up straight. You're really something else, she said, wiping tears from her eyes. Only you could start a grease fire by boiling water for ramen. It's called culinary innovation, I said with a straight face. Charcoal-infused ramen noodles. Michelin star quality. Suddenly, she stopped laughing and looked at me, her expression serious. Ethan, will you always be this good to me? I froze. Honestly, I had no idea what I was doing in this marriage, or if I even loved her. But looking at her small, swelling belly and the hope in her eyes, I nodded. I will. Isabel smiled. The picture of a cat who'd cornered a canary. Then you'd better remember that. As it turned out, I was naive. Being good to Isabel came with a condition. I had to belong to her completely. The first fight happened after I had dinner with a coworker. It was a normal team dinner, 6 of us, 3 guys, 3 women. When I got home, Isabel was sitting on the sofa, my phone in her hand, our iMessage history displayed on the screen. Explain, she said, her voice cold. It was a work dinner, I said, baffled. What's wrong? This Emily. Why is she always texting you? She pointed at the screen. Ethan, I finished the proposal edits. Ethan, see you tomorrow. Sound a little too friendly. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That's how normal colleagues talk. Isabel threw my phone on the floor, shattering the screen. I don't like the way she looks at you. Are you crazy? I picked up the phone. You're spying on me. I'm your wife, she said, as if that explained everything. I have a right to know who you're seeing. We fought until dawn. It ended with me giving in. I promised not to hang out with female coworkers alone again. For the sake of the baby, I told myself I could put up with it. But Isabel's control went far beyond that. She started checking my clothes for any trace of perfume. She installed a tracker on my phone to monitor my location at all times. She even demanded I send her a picture of my lunch every day to confirm who I was eating with. This is a pathological need for control, I protested. I need some personal space. Isabel would just touch her stomach, tears welling up instantly. Baby, I think your daddy doesn't love us anymore. I surrendered immediately. Damn, this woman knew how to play me. By the 6th month, her belly was prominent. She quit her job to stay home and research parenting methods on Goodreads and parenting blogs. Meanwhile, my father-in-law invited me to join the family business, starting as a departmental associate director. Ethan, he'd say, clapping me on the shoulder with enough force to make my teeth rattle, work hard. Don't disappoint my daughter. I nod and smile, cursing him under my breath. In the office, my colleagues looked at me with thinly veiled contempt. The trophy husband who'd married his way to the top. My direct supervisor, a woman in her 40s named Director Roberts who seemed permanently soured on life, made it her mission to make my life hell. Mr. Hayes, she'd say, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I need this report by tomorrow morning. Guess you'll be working late? Not like you have to cook dinner at home, right? I grit my teeth and smile. Of course, Director Roberts. I worked until 11 that night. When I got home, Isabel was waiting for me on the sofa. Why so late? She asked. Working, I said, exhausted, shrugging off my jacket. Roberts had me redo a report. Isabel's eyes changed. Is she giving you a hard time on purpose? I shrugged. Probably. Comes with the territory of being the boss's son-in-law who sleeps his way to the middle. The next day, Director Roberts was transferred to the Cleveland office. I stared at the company-wide email, stunned. I turned to Isabel. Did you do this? She was eating grapes, looking completely unbothered. My dad said she had outstanding skills, perfect for developing new markets. I didn't know whether to be touched or terrified. This woman's loyalty was frightening. As her due date approached, Isabel's emotions became more and more volatile. One night, she shook me awake. Ethan, she said, her face streaked with tears, if I die in childbirth, will you remarry? I was half asleep. Honey, it's the middle of the night. Why are you thinking about this? Answer me, she hissed, digging her nails into my arm. No, of course not. I mumbled. If you die, I'll become a monk. She seemed satisfied and lay back down. 5 minutes later, she spoke again. No, you can't be a monk. I want you to visit my grave every year and tell me what you've been up to. Okay, I said, desperate for sleep. I'll email you daily reports from the great beyond. How about that? Isabel suddenly sat bolt upright, flicked on a lamp, and pulled a stack of papers from the nightstand drawer. Sign this. I squinted. It was a legal agreement stating that if she died during childbirth, I was forbidden from remarrying and was obligated to bring our child to her gravesite annually. Are you serious? I was wide awake now. Are you going to sign it or not? She glared, her hand resting on her belly. Baby, your daddy doesn't love mommy. I sighed and signed my name. This woman was truly, deeply nuts. A week before the due date, Isabel was admitted to the hospital. I want to stay with her every day after work. One night, she suddenly said she was craving spicy pork ramen from that little place in the East Village. Now, I checked my watch. It was already 10 o'clock. Yes, she looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading. I really want it. I drove the 15 miles across town to get the ramen. By the time I got back, it was almost midnight. Isabel took the container, but didn't even open it. You're not going to eat it? I asked. She smiled. I just wanted to see if you'd do it for me. I wanted to scream, but then I saw the satisfied look on her face, and my anger just melted away. This woman, so infuriating, and yet so damn cute. The day she went into labor, I waited outside the delivery room for 8 hours. When a nurse finally came out holding a tiny, wrinkled infant, my legs gave out from under me. It's a girl, the nurse said. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Mom and baby are both healthy. I rushed into the room. Isabel was lying on the bed, looking exhausted, her hair stuck to her damp forehead. In her arms was our daughter, and she was smiling like a child herself. Look, she whispered, our baby. I carefully took the tiny bundle into my arms, and my eyes immediately started burning. In that one moment, all the absurdity, the fights, the insane possessiveness, none of it mattered anymore. She's beautiful, I choked out. Just like you. Isabel reached out and took my hand. Ethan, she said, her eyes tired but brighter than I'd ever seen them. Now you're really mine. I looked at her at our daughter, and I nodded. On the 7th day of my daughter's life, I finally understood the meaning of a living hell. At 3 a.m., the baby's cries sliced through the silence of the penthouse like an air raid siren. I stumbled out of bed and found Isabel already pacing the living room with the baby in her arms. Why didn't you wake me? I asked, rubbing my eyes. Isabel's dark circles were so pronounced, she looked like she was wearing smoky eyeshadow. You have work tomorrow. I reached for the baby, but she turned away. It's fine. Go back to sleep. You're going to collapse if you keep this up, I insisted. Ethan, she suddenly looked up, her gaze sharp. Do you think I'm not capable of taking care of my own child? I immediately threw my hands up in surrender. My mistake. Please continue. Back in bed, I stared at the ceiling. Ever since our daughter was born, Isabel had transformed. Or rather, she'd leveled up from a possessive girlfriend to a possessive, superpowered warlord. She refused a night nurse, refused a nanny, and even refused to let me touch the baby. You'll give her germs, she'd say every time I tried to hold our daughter. The next day at work, I ran into Mark from marketing in the break room. Rough night, Ethan? Mark asked, handing me a coffee. Newborns are a handful, huh? I took a huge gulp of coffee, the bitterness making my face scrunch up. It's not the newborn that's the problem. It's the newborn's mother. Mark gave me a knowing, sleazy smile. Postpartum depression? No, I shook my head. Postpartum dictatorship. When I got home, the living room was buried in a mountain of Amazon boxes. Isabel was on the floor, tearing open packages, surrounded by a sea of baby gear. What's all this? I asked, nudging a box with my foot. A UV sterilizer, Isabel said without looking up, and an air purifier, a water quality tester, an anti-radiation maternity smock. I picked up a baby bottle. This thing cost $100? Is it made of gold? It's imported from Germany. Isabel finally glanced at me. BPA free. I sighed and pulled my credit card out of my wallet. Since the baby's arrival, our spending habits had started to rival those of a Saudi prince. Later that night, I was changing our daughter's diaper when Isabel burst into the nursery. What are you doing? She demanded, snatching the diaper out of my hand. Changing her diaper, I said, completely baffled. She pooped. Isabel inspected the diaper, and her face grew even darker. You're wiping the wrong way. For a girl, you have to wipe front to back, or she'll get an infection. I stood there, frozen. This woman had a standard operating procedure for wiping, but... Get out, she said, pointing to the door. I'll do it. Isabel, I said, trying to keep my voice level. I'm her father. So, she raised an eyebrow. Does being her father mean you get to ignore basic pediatric science? That night, we had the biggest fight of our marriage. It ended with me slamming the door and spending the night on a park bench in Central Park. In the morning, a sanitation worker nearly had a heart attack when she saw me. "Son, did you sleep here all night?" I wiped my face, my stubble scratching my palm. I looked like a homeless person. When I walked back into the apartment, Isabel was feeding the baby. She saw me. Her lips parted as if to say something, but no words came out. I walked silently into the bathroom and let the hot shower wash away my anger and exhaustion. When I came out, a plate of scrambled eggs and a glass of milk were on the dining table. Isabel stood nearby, holding the baby, her eyes darting away from mine. "Eat," she said softly. "They're a little overcooked." My nose stung. This woman, even after a massive fight, she still remembered I hadn't eaten. For our daughter's 1-month celebration, my father-in-law threw a lavish party. In the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons, I stood next to Isabel like a smiling prop, enduring the scrutiny of her various relatives. "The baby looks like her mother, thank God," one aunt said with a laugh. "So, Ethan, when are you having a second?" An uncle asked, clapping my shoulder. "Need a boy to inherit the family business." My face ached from holding a fake smile. What did these people think I was? A stud horse? After the party, my father-in-law summoned me to his study. "I hear you're doing well at the company," he said, handing me a cigar. "Since Robert's left, the marketing department's performance is up 20%. I was floored, just doing my job. "There's a new project launching next month," he said, blowing a smoke ring. "I want you to lead it." I left the study, buzzing with excitement, eager to tell Isabel the good news. But as I rounded a corner in the hallway, I overheard her talking to her best friend. "You really let him lead the new project?" her friend asked. "Uh-huh." Isabel's voice was laced with amusement. "I told Dad to throw him a bone. Give him a little taste of success." My heart plummeted into my stomach. My promotion, my success, it was just a scrap tossed to me by the princess. I got blackout drunk that night. When I stumbled home, Isabel was waiting for me on the sofa. "Are you happy?" she asked. "So happy." I slurred, a manic grin spreading across my face. "Ecstatic. Turns out I'm just the court jester in your family's little drama, a kept man you all get to laugh at." Isabel's face changed. "What are you talking about?" "What am I talking about?" I swayed on my feet, pointing a finger at her. "Are you and your father playing games with me? Giving me a project, so I'll be grateful. So I'll lick your boots." "Ethan," Isabel stood up. "Do you have any idea what I did to get you?" "Give me what?" I cut her off. "To keep me as your little pet." Tears instantly welled in Isabel's eyes. I froze, the alcohol draining from my system. In all the time I'd known her, I had never seen her cry like this. "Get out," she whispered, pointing to the door. "I don't want to look at you." I stayed in a hotel for 3 days. On the 4th morning, my phone rang. It was my father-in-law. "Ethan," his voice was grim. "Isabel has a high fever. She's in the hospital." When I arrived at Mount Sinai, Isabel was lying in a hospital bed and 4 drip in her arm. She had lost weight, her face as pale as the sheets. The doctor pulled me aside in the hallway. "It's pneumonia, brought on by postpartum depression and severe exhaustion. Her immune system is shot." I stood outside her room, unable to go in. Through the glass, I watched her clumsily trying to breastfeed our daughter, coughing quietly while humming a lullaby. A nurse walked over. "Sir, aren't you going in?" I shook my head, turned, and went downstairs. I bought a slice of tiramisu from the little Italian bakery she loved. When I returned, Isabel was asleep. I placed the dessert on the bedside table and gently lifted our daughter from her arms. The little one squirmed in my embrace and then, unexpectedly, smiled. In that instant, all my resentment, all my anger just vanished. When Isabel woke up, I was changing the baby's diaper, wiping front to back the correct way. "Ethan." Her voice was raspy. I put the baby down and walked her bed. "Are you hungry? I bought you that tiramisu you like." Isabel's eyes turned red again. "I'm sorry. I'm the one who should be sorry," I said, taking her hand. "I was an ass." She shook her head. "I was too stubborn." I leaned down and hugged her, smelling the faint scent of antiseptic in her hair. "Let's just stop fighting." Isabel nodded against my chest, her tears soaking my shirt. The day she was discharged, the sun was bright. I held our daughter in one arm and Isabel's hand in the other. As we reached the hospital entrance, she stopped. "Ethan," she said seriously, "I pushed for you to get that project, and it wasn't out of pity." I raised an eyebrow. "Then what?" "Because I believed you could do it," she smiled faintly. "You're better than any of the yes men my father employs." A warmth spread through my chest. I leaned in close to her ear. "So, does this mean I can sleep in a master bedroom tonight? The guest bed is killing my back." Isabel pinched my side. "We'll see how you behave." On the way home, our daughter slept in my arms. Isabel leaned her head on my shoulder, sunlight streaming through the car window, blanketing us in warmth. I suddenly thought, maybe this life wasn't so bad. I had a crazy, possessive wife, but at least she loved me. I had a control-freak father-in-law, but at least he was rich. I had a demanding little princess, but at least she looked like me. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily. "Ethan, I sent the presentation for tomorrow's meeting to your email." I was about to reply when Isabel's voice floated over, soft and dangerous. "Who's that?" I handed her the phone. "Work stuff. For your review, ma'am." Isabel glanced at the screen and nodded satisfied. "That's more like it." I smiled and kissed her forehead. This was life, I guessed. A mess of compromises and fights, but sweetened with moments of warmth. When we got home, I volunteered to make dinner. As I placed the blackened, charred eggs on the table, Isabel and my daughter, in her high chair, gave me identical looks of disgust. "Well, Lily," I said to my infant daughter, "looks like it's DoorDash from now on." Isabel burst into laughter, tears streaming down her face. I discovered the secret on Isabel's phone the day of our daughter's 100-day party. The crystal chandeliers in the ballroom were blinding. I slipped out to the fire escape for a smoke, pulling out my phone to reply to Emily. The new project bid was due, and my whole department was on crunch time. As I unlocked the screen, a notification banner flashed at the top. "Location signal anomaly. Target has left the safe zone." Looking for something? Isabel's voice materialized behind me. I nearly threw my phone over the railing. She was wearing a champagne-colored couture gown that clung to her post-pregnancy curves like a second skin. She was a work of art. If you ignored the fact that her fingers were currently digging into the nape of my neck with the force of a vice grip. "Just a work message," I said, turning the phone so she could see the screen. "For your review, director." Isabel didn't take it. Instead, she pulled her own phone from her clutch and tapped open a black, iconless app. The screen displayed a floor plan overlaid with a moving red line. My exact path for the last half hour, detailed down to the 4 minutes and 38 seconds I'd spent in the southwest corner of the ballroom. "New app?" I asked, pointing at the screen. "Version 3.0. She tilted her head, a sly smile playing on her lips. Now with heart rate monitoring and voice print analysis. A cold sweat broke out on my back. My doctor told me last week I had a slight heart arrhythmia. Did she know that too? Just kidding. Isabel suddenly laughed, wrapping a strand of my hair around her finger. "It's just a normal GPS tracker." On the drive home, Lily was fast asleep in her car seat. While we were stopped at a red light, Isabel suddenly said, "My father wants to see you. Tomorrow, M." My hand slipped on the steering wheel, and I almost swerved into the guardrail. A summons from Mr. Sterling was never good news. The last time we'd met, he made me drink 3 shots of Macallan 25 and then announced to his entire board that the Hayes boy has nothing going for him but his face. "Is it about the project?" I asked tentatively. Isabel was touching up her lipstick in the vanity mirror. Her hand jerked, a slash of scarlet marking her cheek. "He wants to transfer you to the Cleveland office." The air freshener in the car suddenly smelled suffocating. I knew about the Cleveland project. It was a complete disaster. The previous manager had been driven to a nervous breakdown by the local partners. "You have to talk him out of it," I said, my eyes fixed on Lily's sleeping face in the rearview mirror. "Tell him I need to be here for the baby." Isabel snapped her makeup compact shut. The sound was like a gun being cocked. "I told him you'd be in his office at 10 a.m. sharp." I had nightmares all night. I dreamed I was trapped inside a baby monitor, Isabel's giant face staring down at me, her eyes scanning my every move with infrared beams. I woke up in a panic at 4 in the morning to find the bed beside me empty. I heard a rustling sound from a nursery. I pushed the door open and saw Isabel kneeling by the crib, a pair of scissors glinting in her hand. What are you doing? I lunged, snatching the scissors from her. They were the small, round-tipped safety scissors for trimming a baby's nails. She looked up at me, her eyes vacant, the dark circles underneath them like bruises. I heard her crying. In the moonlight, Lily was sleeping soundly, her cheeks a perfect, peachy pink. The back of Isabel's silk nightgown was soaked with sweat, and her fingers were trembling. Go to bed, I said, lifting her into my arms. She felt as light as a paper doll. I'll stay with her. The next day, at 9:50 a.m., I stood outside Mr. Sterling's office adjusting my tie. His secretary, a young woman named Linda, leaned in. Mr. Hayes, the chairman has already chewed out 3 directors this morning. Good luck. When I entered, Mr. Sterling was brewing tea, the steam rising from a clay pot. Sit, he said without looking up. I had barely touched the edge of the sofa when he threw a thick stack of papers at me. Complaint letters from the Cleveland Project. Over 400 of them. The papers scattered across the floor, each one seemingly marked with fury. As I bent to pick them up, I heard Mr. Sterling's cold laugh. Did you think you could live off my daughter forever? Dad! Isabel burst into the room, her heels clacking like gunshots on the marble floor. You promised you wouldn't give him a hard time. Mr. Sterling slammed his teacup on the desk. I'm teaching him how to be a man, and you teach a man by exiling him to the Rust Belt. Isabel shot back, throwing her Hermes bag onto the sofa. I felt like a volleyball being spiked back and forth between them. Finally, Mr. Sterling made his decision. Fix the Cleveland situation by next Monday, or you're out of this company. I walked out of the building with my shirt drenched in sweat. Isabel grabbed my arm and dragged me to the parking garage. I have a plan. Her plan was to break into her father's home office. When Isabel pulled a folder labeled Cleveland Project from his safe, I finally understood. The local partner was the son of one of Mr. Sterling's old army buddies, and he'd been skimming millions off the top. Use this to negotiate, Isabel said, her eyes gleaming. He won't dare to cross you. I stared at her trembling eyelashes and suddenly realized this was all a setup by her father. He knew Isabel would help me. He was forcing her to pick a side. On Monday morning, I walked into Mr. Sterling's office with the signed contract. He glanced at the document and then asked, Do you know why I chose you, Ethan? Because I'm handsome? Because Isabel needs you. He twisted the wedding band on his finger. Her mother had postpartum depression. She once tried to jump off a building, holding Isabel. My throat tightened. The scissors, the late-night vigils, the obsessive need for control. It all clicked into place. I bought Isabel's favorite chestnut cheesecake on the way home. But when I opened the door, she was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by dozens of printed photos. All of them were of me and Emily from work. Explain, her voice was terrifyingly calm. These are all from project meetings from at least 6 months ago. I knelt to pick up the photos. Where did you get these? Isabel held up my old work phone, which I'd left in my study. Your iCloud synced over 7,000 photos. Only these were in an encrypted folder. I remember backing up my work files before leaving my old job. Before I could explain, Lily started crying in the nursery. Like a switch had been flipped, Isabel's menacing aura vanished, and she sprinted to the baby's room. Late that night, my phone vibrated me awake. It was a text from Emily. Ethan, there's a problem with the bid. Call me ASAP. I tiptoed out to the balcony. I had just dialed her number when I heard the hinge of the glass door creak. Isabel was leaning against the frame, the moonlight tracing her silhouette. Did I wake you? I hung up the phone. She walked over and pressed her forehead against my back. I dreamed you left us. Her tears soaked through my sweater. I turned and held her, feeling the sharp knobs of her spine. She had lost 25 pounds since giving birth, but still refused to hire a nanny. You're an idiot, I said, kissing the top of her head. My paycheck is direct deposited into your account. She laughed through her tears, then suddenly snatched my phone and redialed Emily's number. This is Ethan's wife, she said sweetly. If it's about work, you can talk to him at the office tomorrow. After hanging up, she shot me a triumphant look. I sighed in resignation and then remembered my backup phone, the one I used for gaming with my buddies, hidden behind the AC unit on the balcony. The next day at work, the rumor that I was whipped was the talk of the office. During lunch, a few of the guys gathered around. How do you handle a woman like that? I took a drag from my cigarette. Tell her you love her 3 times a day, give her your entire salary, do all the housework. And Emily's voice cut in as she appeared in the break room. Let her check your phone whenever she wants and block all female contacts. The group erupted in laughter. I glanced at Emily and saw the redness in her eyes. At the end of the day, I received her resignation email. Attached was a complete and perfect handover of all her project files. That night, I voluntarily handed my backup phone to Isabel. She was feeding the baby and nearly choked. You're really giving this up? There's only one game on it, I said, crouching down to meet her gaze. Living with you is like playing a survival horror game, but damn it, I'm in for the ride. She laughed and kicked me playfully, then pulled my hand and placed it on her C-section scar, which was still healing. The 4-inch raised line was a monument to the war we had survived together. In the middle of the night, Lily started crying, and we both woke up. In the darkness, Isabel suddenly said, "My dad cheated on my mom, you know?" I was instantly wide awake. She continued, "When my mom was standing on that ledge with me, he just said, 'Go ahead and jump. It'll be cleaner that way.'" I felt the dampness on her pillow. She rolled on top of me, pinning me down. "If you ever dare." I wouldn't dare. I surrendered, holding my hands up. It's a family tradition. The Hayes men are terrified of their wives. She bit my collarbone, leaving a small, crescent-shaped mark. Moonlight slipped through a gap in the curtains, illuminating the mobile hanging over the crib. The colorful little fish spun silently in the darkness, like a frozen rainbow. I suddenly remembered the first time we met, when Isabel asked me the difference between a programmer and a prostitute. I knew the answer now. We were both experts at debugging. She was just debugging our marriage, and I was trying to repair her shattered sense of security. The night our daughter's fever spiked to 103, Isabel's entire defense system crashed. At 2 in the morning, the fluorescent lights of the pediatric ER hummed over our heads. I held our feverish daughter, Lily, waiting in line while Isabel frantically Googled infant fever mortality rate on her phone, the blue light making her face look ghostly. "Stop looking at that," I said, taking the phone from her. The doctor said it's a common virus. Her eyes, vacant, were fixed on a force stand. That's what they said about my mother's cold. That sentence was an ice pick to my spine. My father-in-law's words, her mother tried to jump off a building, holding Isabel, suddenly had a terrifying, concrete shape, a feverish baby and a desperate mother on a rooftop ledge. When our number was called, Isabel snatched Lily from my arms and rushed into the exam room. I followed and saw her furiously peeling an apple with a box cutter she'd pulled from her purse, the blade moving so fast it looked like she might peel her own skin off. "Dad, hold her head still," the doctor said, preparing the needle for the 4. Isabel's blade suddenly pointed at the doctor. "Be gentle," she hissed. The air in the room froze. I slowly took the box cutter from her hand. Her palm was ice cold. As the needle went into our daughter's tiny vein, Isabel bit her own lip, hard enough to draw blood. On the drive home, Lily was asleep in my arms. Isabel drove, her eyes in the rearview mirror like 2 empty wells. "That apple," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "You peeled it with real, artistic flair." She slammed on the brakes, screeching to a halt on the side of the road. Her forehead rested against the steering wheel as she took shuddering breaths, the seatbelt digging a raw, red line into her collarbone. "Ethan," her voice was like sandpaper. "I think I might be sick." I reached out to touch her forehead and felt a cold sweat. Just as I was about to speak, my phone buzzed. A text from the Cleveland partner. "Mr. Hayes, someone altered the quality inspection reports." At 4 in the morning, I was on the balcony, chain-smoking and juggling 3 tasks, replying to work emails, reading WebMD articles about child fevers, and secretly looking up the name of the medication I'd seen Isabel take. The name on the pill bottle she thought she'd hidden was Paxil. A glass of warm milk suddenly appeared in the ashtray. Isabel was standing in the moonlight, wearing one of my old T-shirts, the hem riding up to reveal the pale, silver lines of her C-section scar. "They're antidepressants," she said, her voice flat. "My doctor prescribed them 2 months after Lily was born." The milk curdled in my stomach. I thought about the scissors in the night, the obsessive cleaning, the escalating surveillance. It wasn't just a possessive streak. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I was afraid you'd have me committed," she laughed. but her eyes glistened with tears, like my father did to my mother. My phone screen lit up. A colleague had sent a side-by-side comparison of the altered inspection reports. The numbers had been doctored just enough to fall below the passing grade, a move vicious enough to kill the project without technically committing fraud. Isabel leaned over to look at the screen, her shampoo-scented hair brushing my cheek. Someone's trying to screw you over. Your dad. His new wife. She tapped her finger on the signature at the bottom of the report. See that? Lorraine Sterling, CFO, and my stepmother. I nearly choked on my milk. The Sterling family drama was more twisted than a soap opera. The first wife jumps off a roof, the daughter is obsessively controlling, and the new wife is sabotaging the family business from the inside. Your family. I searched for the right words. You have very complex interpersonal dynamics. Isabel suddenly straddled my lap, looking down at me. Ethan, do me a favor. Name it. Ruin her, she said, a fire I hadn't seen in months igniting in her eyes. And I'll help you save the Cleveland project. I ran my hand over the sharp ridge of her spine. I finally understood why Mr. Sterling had chosen me, not as a successor, but as a lightning rod for Isabel, a living target she could unleash her fury on without actually killing someone. Deal, I said, tilting my head back to kiss her. But on one condition. She raised an eyebrow. I pulled out my backup phone from its hiding spot in the flower pot. You delete the tracking software. The next day at work, the office was buzzing with rumors that I was about to be fired. Lorraine's cloying perfume preceded her. Mr. Hayes, she purred. The chairman wants to see you. 28th floor. In the elevator, I straightened my tie in the reflection. The man staring back had dark circles under his eyes, but he was smiling. Ever since I'd learned the root of Isabel's illness, her insane behavior had become a language I could finally understand. Every frantic action was a cry for help. The door to Mr. Sterling's office was ajar. I was about to knock when I heard the sound of shattering porcelain. Lorraine, you've gone too far. Mr. Sterling's roar made the glass pane tremble. I've gone too far? A woman shrieked with laughter. You give the most important new project to an outsider. Are you trying to replace my Kyle with him? I took a step back and bumped into a solid wall of muscle. The head of security, a guy named Chun, grinned at me with yellow teeth. Mr. Hayes, the chairman is expecting you. The office went silent. When I walked in, Mr. Sterling was pressing a towel to his bleeding hand. The remains of a clay teapot lay on the floor. Lorraine, dressed in a Chanel suit, looked like a perfectly composed mannequin. Ethan, you're here, Mr. Sterling motioned for me to sit. About Cleveland. Dad, Isabel burst in like a hurricane, holding up a tablet. Look what your finance department has been up to. The screen showed a detailed data comparison, far more damning than what I had. Isabel's hair was a mess, and she was wearing slippers. She'd clearly run straight from home. Lorraine's face went pale. Did you hack into the company's servers? Not just the servers, Isabel said with a sickly sweet smile. I also hacked into your son's offshore gambling accounts. She turned to her father. Dad, guess how much Kyle lost this year? 20 million. All from the company's reserve funds. As I watched this family meltdown, I noticed Mr. Sterling's expression. He was looking at Isabel like she was a bomb about to detonate. Everyone out, he said, rubbing his temples. Ethan, you stay. When we were alone, he pulled a bottle of whiskey from his desk and poured 2 generous glasses. Isabel is just like her mother, he said, downing half the glass in one go. Brilliant, obsessive, prone to extremes. I stared at the ice in my glass. Why didn't you? Why didn't I get her help? He gave a bitter laugh. Because I care about appearances. The wife of Sterling Enterprises chairman is mentally ill. The stock would have plummeted. The sunlight from the window caught the gray in his sideburns. In that moment, the titan of industry looked like a tired old man. Now it's your turn, he stared at me. Either you fix her, or she'll destroy you. I twisted my wedding ring, thinking of Isabel that morning, humming quietly to Lily in her crib. The morning light through the curtains had given her a soft, golden halo. She had looked like any other young, happy mother. I choose a third option, I said, raising my glass and draining it. I'll go crazy with her. Mr. Sterling looked at me as if I were both a fool and a savior. He opened a drawer and tossed a flash drive on the desk. Proof that Lorraine has been embezzling company funds. At the board meeting next Monday, you'll be the one presenting it. When I left the building, Isabel was waiting for me by a flower bed. She was poking an anthill with a stick, muttering die, die, die like a mischievous child. All settled? She asked, her eyes bright. I nodded and, in one smooth motion, slipped the pill bottle from her pocket. The label for the Paxil had fine print. Take twice daily as needed. Isabel had only been taking one when she couldn't bear it anymore. What do you want for dinner? I asked, putting my arm around her shoulder. How about my famous charcoal-flavored ramen? She pinched the flesh at my waist. I want Japanese, the most expensive place in the city. Done. But you have to promise me one thing. What? You'll see a therapist tomorrow, I said, tightening my grip as she tried to pull away. I'll go with you. Isabel's eyelashes fluttered violently, like the wings of a butterfly in a storm. As we walked past the building's glass facade, I saw our reflection. She was leaning on my shoulder, a smile on her lips, but tears were streaming down her face. On the drive home, Lily babbled in her car seat. At a red light, Isabel asked, Ethan, why don't you run? I pointed to the rearview mirror. In it, our daughter was happily chewing on her own foot, smiling at us. Because of her, I said, gently squeezing the back of Isabel's neck. And because of you. She slapped my hand away, but secretly threaded her fingers through the hem of my jacket. Outside, the sunset painted the clouds in shades of gold and red, just like the neon lights of the bar where we first met. My phone buzzed. A text from Emily. Ethan, Lorraine approached me. She wanted me to give false testimony against you. I was about to reply when Isabel snatched the phone and threw it out the window. Hey, I just bought that. She tilted her chin up. I'll buy you 10 more. Then she added in a small voice, and you're not allowed to be friends with Emily on Facebook. I laughed and stole a kiss from her forehead. This crazy woman. Even her jealousy was kind of adorable. 3 days before our daughter's first birthday, I found the 7 journals in a hidden compartment of Isabel's vanity. Leather-bound, with dates embossed in gold leaf, they chronicled her life from 2018 to the present. The latest one was open, a fountain pen resting on a page where the ink was still wet. Ethan made eye contact with Emily for 3 seconds today. His eyelashes fluttered 20% faster than usual. Surprised, Isabel's voice came from behind me. She had just showered, her hair dripping onto the collar of her silk robe, revealing a fresh scratch on her collarbone. She'd gotten it last week after smashing the window of a car belonging to one of Lorraine's goons with a wine bottle. I held up the journal. Isn't this a slight invasion of privacy? How can it be an invasion when it's between a husband and wife? She tilted her head, a wet strand of hair clinging to her cheek like a black spiderweb. Just like you wouldn't tell me you saw my mother's medical records in Dad's office yesterday. My blood ran cold. The photo I'd secretly taken of the borderline personality disorder diagnosis from my father-in-law's safe was currently buried in an encrypted album on my phone. Isabel leaned in, her warm breath on my neck. Now we're even. The dangerous equilibrium between us felt like dancing on a razor's edge. Ever since I'd learned the truth about her mother, we'd maintained a fragile peace, 2 demolition experts who both knew exactly where the bomb was planted. On the day of Lily's party, Lorraine's son, Kyle, showed up uninvited, wearing a garish pink suit. He swaggered over to the baby's stroller. Let me see my little niece. Isabel's stiletto heel came down squarely on his expensive loafer. As Kyle yelped and bent over, she leaned in and whispered, touch my daughter, and I'll project a PowerPoint of your embezzlement history onto the ballroom wall. I was cutting the cake nearby, the cold light from the knife flashing across Lorraine's pale face. The woman had no idea that the ledgers detailing her son's gambling debts were currently hidden inside the solid gold pendant I'd just given my daughter. Halfway through the party, my father-in-law tapped his glass. Effective immediately, Ethan Hayes is promoted to Executive Vice President of Sterling Enterprises. Amid the applause, Isabel pinched the soft flesh of my inner thigh. What did you and my father conspire about? He wants to groom his granddaughter to be his successor, I said through a pained smile, placing a piece of cake on her plate. So he's promoting her father first. Isabel's pupils contracted. She shot up from her seat, her napkin fluttering to the floor. Her reaction confirmed my suspicion. The trigger for her mother's breakdown all those years ago had been my father-in-law announcing his intention to train an heir who wasn't of his bloodline. "Excuse me," she said, grabbing her Chanel bag, the metal chain scraping a red line across the back of my hand. I found her 5 minutes later in the underground parking garage. She was gouging the side of Kyle's Porsche with her car keys, the motion as mechanical and brutal as a malfunctioning machine. A beam of moonlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the tear tracks on her face. "He's going to turn Lily into another me," she choked out, the key carving deep wounds into the car door. "He'll lock her in a cage, feed her antidepressants, raise her like a prize pet." When I took the key from her, her nails dug into my wrist, drawing blood. The smell of it filled the air, mixing with the salt of her tears. The sound of approaching security guards echoed in the distance. I grabbed her and pulled her into a fire escape stairwell. In the darkness, her breathing slowly returned to normal. She felt my bleeding wrist and suddenly brought it to her mouth, her warm tongue licking at the wound. "You smell like rusted coins," she murmured. "Is that a compliment?" "It's a compliment." She looked up, a strange light in her eyes. "That you taste like metal, just like me." The emergency light above us sputtered, casting a net of shadows across her face. In that moment, I understood that loving a woman like Isabel was like embracing a thorny rose. The pain was proof you were still alive. On the drive home, Isabel slept against the window. While stopped at a light, I looked through her bag. Inside, beside the broken lipstick, was a crumpled appointment card. "Thursday, 2 p.m., Mount Sinai Psychiatry, Room 7. The appointment was for tomorrow. The next day, I arrived at the hospital 2 hours early. The hallway of the psychiatric ward was lined with wilting plants. The door to Room 7 was ajar, and I could see a female doctor in a white coat organizing files. "Excuse me," I knocked. "Could I see Isabel's file?" The doctor pushed her glasses up her nose. "And you are?" "Her husband," I said, showing her a photo of our wedding on my phone. "She's been having terrible nightmares. Postpartum depression with comorbid borderline personality disorder," the doctor said, pulling out a thick file. "And PTSD." As she flipped through the pages, a sentence leaped out at me. Patient witnessed her mother's suicide at age 14 and subsequently attempted to carve out the veins in her own wrist with a box cutter, stating she wanted to see the blue blood her mother talked about. The office door was suddenly kicked open. Isabel stood silhouetted against the light, holding a leaking bag of bubble tea. "Ethan." Her voice was sickeningly sweet. "Guess how many sleeping pills I put in the doctor's coffee?" The doctor's face went white. I quickly took the bag from Isabel. The cup was labeled unsweetened, and the condensation on it was as cold as Isabel's eyes. "Just kidding," she laughed, pulling a thermos from her purse. "Freshly ground Colombian blend." The doctor took the cup and fled the room, muttering an excuse about checking on another patient. Isabel sat in the doctor's chair and started spinning, her skirt flaring out. "I come here every week, you know," she said, kicking off her heels. "I just wanted you to find out today." "Why?" "I wanted to see you worry about me." She stopped spinning and placed her bare foot on my knee. "Your heart rate just spiked. My phone app notified me." I grabbed her cold ankle. "What do the rest of the notes say?" "They say how I plan to kill you." She leaned in, her hair brushing against my neck. "Like putting alcohol in your brake fluid or grinding up sleeping pills and putting them on your razor." The sound of me swallowing was deafening in the silent room. Isabel suddenly kissed me, a kiss that tasted of blood and mints. When she pulled away, she licked her lips. "Kidding. I'm kidding about all of it." The wind blew the blinds, sending patterns of light dancing across the floor. In the distance, I could hear the sounds of children laughing from the pediatric ward, an echo from another world. "The doctor says I'm making progress," Isabel said, fiddling with the buttons on my shirt. "At least now when I want to kill you, I give you a heads up. And I'm supposed to say thank you?" "You're supposed to say I love you," she corrected. 3 times a day, hand over your paycheck, and do all the housework." It was the joke from our wedding. I wrapped my arms around her thin waist and noticed a child's drawing taped to the back of the chair. 3 stick figures holding hands under a crooked sun. When we got home, Isabel, for the first time, let me use the master bathroom. As the hot water washed the dry blood from my wrist, I heard the lock click. Through the frosted glass, I saw her shadow pressed against the door. Ethan, her voice was muffled. If I turn into my mother, then I'll be your daughter's stepfather, I said, turning off the water, and I'll inherit all your family's money. A fist slammed against the glass. I smiled, dried myself off, and opened the door. She was standing there with red-rimmed eyes, holding a hairdryer. You'll catch a cold if you don't dry your hair. The warm air hummed as her fingers, surprisingly gentle, ran through my hair. In the mirror, our reflections were soft and blurry in the steam. That night, my father-in-law called. Lorraine resigned, he said. I could hear the sound of shattering glass in the background. Are you satisfied? I looked at Isabel, asleep on the sofa with Lily, her fingers still looped around my tie. Dad, I said, calling him that for the first time. Isabel doesn't need antidepressants. There was a long silence on the other end. Then what does she need? She needs you to admit that you sent her mother to a mental hospital to silence her, not to cure her. I heard a ragged breath on the other end. Just when I thought he was going to explode, he said, at next month's board meeting, you'll be presenting the quarterly report. After I hung up, the moonlight streamed through the curtains, illuminating mother and daughter. Isabel's eyelashes cast feathery shadows on her cheeks, fluttering with each breath like a dying butterfly. I gently untangled my tie from her fingers. She woke instantly, her hand shooting out to grab my wrist. Where are you going? She asked, her voice thick with sleep and suspicion. To get a blanket, I said, gesturing to her bare legs, and to replace the sleeping pills you hid under the coffee table with vitamins. Isabel stared at me for a moment. Then a real, genuine laugh escaped her lips. It wasn't her usual calculated, sweet smile, but a childlike, unguarded grin. Ethan, she said, rubbing her eyes, if you ever cheat on me. I know. I leaned down and kissed her forehead. I'll be taxidermied and displayed in the nursery as a cautionary tale. Lily smacked her lips in her sleep. Isabel buried her face in my neck, her breathing evening out. The scent of early autumn flowers drifted through the window, a gentle fragrance that settled over us, covering everything. 06 the night before the board meeting, I found Isabel in the study, hacking into her father's private server. The blue light from the monitor reflected in her bloodshot eyes, the frantic clicking of the keyboard sounding like Morse code. You gonna hack your own father? I asked, handing her coffee. She licked the whipped cream from the rim of the mug. No, I'm saving you. A complex diagram suddenly filled the screen, a map of financial flows titled Sterling Capital Subsidiaries. Red arrows pointed like arteries to 27 shell corporations. The money Lorraine embezzled. It's enough to put her away for life. I stared at the screen, a line item labeled Cleveland Project Quality Inspection Report flashing in the data stream. A cold sweat trickled down my back. Isabel had been gathering this evidence all along, using the same obsessive focus she used to monitor me. The next morning, my hands were shaking as I tied my tie. Isabel suddenly thrust Lily into my arms. Our daughter was wearing a onesie that read CEO in training and was trying to grab my ID badge. Take Lily with you, Isabel said, adjusting my tie. My father won't have the heart to yell at you in front of his granddaughter. This crazy woman was using our baby as a human shield. The boardroom smelled of bitter green tea. My father-in-law sat at the head of the table. Lorraine's seat was empty, but her perfume haunted the air vents. As I started the presentation with the evidence Isabel had compiled, the projector screen suddenly switched to a live feed. It showed Lorraine frantically stuffing passports into a suitcase. Sorry, Isabel's voice came through the room speakers. There was a bit of a lag. The room erupted in murmurs. My father-in-law's teacup froze midair. I then noticed that every board member's tablet had unlocked to display the same live feed of the attempted escape. In the background of the video, Cal could be heard wailing, "Mom, how did they find out about my gambling debts?" Was this my daughter's doing? My father-in-law asked me. I silently held up Lily. As if on cue, she let out a little spit-up bubble, which dripped onto the voting console, causing a short circuit. The entire room's smart system began playing a continuous loop of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. My father-in-law laughed. This man, who had sent his wife to a mental institution, was looking at his granddaughter with an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration. "Ethan," he announced, "you're the new CEO." Amid the applause, my phone buzzed. A message from Isabel, in her signature possessive sweet style. "Congrats, Mr. CEO winky face. The tracking system has been upgraded to 4.0. Now, with real-time board member emotional analysis." On the drive home, I stopped at a pediatric clinic. Isabel's diagnosis report lay on the passenger seat, creased from where Lily's teething crackers had been. Next to the words post-traumatic stress disorder, someone had drawn a crooked, smiley face. In the clinic, the psychologist explained exposure therapy. She needs to confront the place where her mother died. Will that make her worse? It's like lancing a boil, the doctor said, pushing up his glasses. It's painful, but you have to let the poison out for it to heal. I had a nightmare that night. I dreamed Isabel was standing on the edge of a rooftop, holding a younger version of herself. I woke up to find the bed empty. The baby monitor was picking up the sound of humming. I found her in the study, reading The Little Prince to Lily. The moonlight through the curtains cast a silver glow on her eyelashes. This woman, who had once tried to carve out her own veins, was now turning the pages with a delicate touch, afraid to wake the sleeping child on her lap. "Ethan," she said without looking up, "let's go see my mother." She was referring to the urn that had remained locked in her father's safe, unspoken of for years. The following weekend, we went to the cemetery in a light drizzle. Isabel held Lily and stood before the headstone. I held the umbrella, watching the rain trace paths like tears down her mother's photograph. The inscription was a single, stark line. "Here lies a woman who was killed by love." "Mom," Isabel's voice was a mere whisper. "Look, I found someone who won't run away." She took Lily's tiny hand and touched it to the cold stone. The baby's fingers brushed against the engraving, and she let out a sudden, happy giggle. The sound was so pure it seemed to shatter the 20 years of gloom that hung over the plot. Isabel's tears finally fell, mixing with the rain and landing on the word love, as if to finally break its curse. When we got home, Isabel dismantled the surveillance hub in the study. She knelt amidst a bizarre altar of hard drives and circuit boards, methodically unplugging each cable as if disarming a bomb. "Really hanging it all up?" I teased. She threw a motherboard at my chest. I kept the cloud backup. Later that night, I was woken by a faint rustling. Isabel was installing a new tracking chip in my phone, a sly smile playing on her lips in the moonlight. I pretended to roll over in my sleep, pulling her into my arms. It was better to let her think I didn't know, just as she pretended not to know that I knew. This dangerous, silent understanding was perhaps our love story. We were like two lovers who constantly poisoned each other, just to cultivate the antidote in our blood. The next morning, we held Lily's first birthday party in the garden. As my father-in-law held his granddaughter and announced the formation of the Lily Foundation, Isabel pinched my thigh under the table. "You dare turn my daughter into a corporate puppet, and I'll poison you." I smiled and handed her a piece of cake. Stuck in the frosting was a micro flash drive. On it was her mother's complete, unredacted medical file. It turned out her mother had never been mentally ill at all. She had simply discovered her husband's financial crimes. "Ethan," Isabel said, crushing the flash drive in her hand, her fingers smeared with frosting. "Let's run away." "What?" "Take Lily and me to Cleveland," she said, licking the frosting from her fingers. "You can manage the project, and I can hack into the local school district. I hear you have to get on the wait list for kindergarten 3 years in advance." Amid the laughter of our guests, I kissed this crazy, beautiful woman. Her lips tasted of sweet cream, tart strawberries, and the faint coppery tang of blood from where she'd bitten my lip that morning. Maybe this is what love was. A sweet surface hiding a rusty, metallic truth. Like the tracking chip she gave me, both a shackle and a lifeline. Like the emergency tranquilizer I kept hidden in my wedding ring, both a precaution and a promise. In the corner of the garden, our daughter was taking her first wobbly steps. In her left hand, she clutched her grandfather's thumb. In her right, she held a surveillance camera she had somehow dismantled. She was smiling like a little devil. This tiny human, with the blood of an obsessive genius flowing through her veins. What would she become? I looked at the 3 generations standing together in the sunlight and realized the answer didn't really matter. For people like us, happiness always had to taste a little like blood to feel real. 07 The first snow fell in Cleveland the day our daughter, Lily, built her first surveillance camera out of Legos. Look at you, Lily. I snapped a picture and sent it to Isabel. The photo showed our little girl trying to stick her creation to the kindergarten fence. More creative than your mother already. My phone immediately buzzed with a 30-second voice message from Isabel, the airport announcer audible in the background. Ethan Hayes, don't you dare turn my daughter into a hacker. I swear to God. Her voice cracked on the last few words, and I could almost picture her new manicure digging into her boarding pass. 3 days earlier, my father-in-law had a heart attack, and Isabel had to fly back to New York to take over. Before she left, she entrusted Lily to me, after installing a 4th-generation tracking chip in my watch, this one with body temperature and blood alcohol monitoring. Daddy, look. Lily tugged on my pants. I followed her finger. The red Lego brick on her makeshift camera was blinking ominously. I knelt down and heard the kindergarten teacher's voice from a tiny speaker. Mr. Hayes, could you please come to the director's office? On the director's computer screen was a feed from every security camera in the school. In the bottom right corner, a small window showed a 45-degree aerial view of the playground, courtesy of Lily's Lego cam. Your daughter has reconfigured our security system, the director said, sliding a special needs child evaluation form across the desk. During nap time, she also dismantled 3 fire extinguishers. I stared at the check mark next to potential gifted tendencies and suddenly understood how my father-in-law must have felt raising Isabel. Genetics were more invasive than any tracking software. On the way home, Lily was half asleep on my shoulder. The streetlights stretched our shadows long behind us, like 2 monsters leaning on each other. My phone lit up. It was a photo from Isabel. She was standing by her father's hospital bed, a heart monitor blinking green in the background. The text was just 3 words. He said sorry. The snow was coming down harder. I held Lily tighter and quickened my pace. A figure darted out from a corner, Kyle's greasy face peering out from under a hood. Hey, bro-in-law, can we talk? This sniveling coward, who Isabel had terrified into submission, was now clutching a yellowed document. I instinctively covered Lily's eyes, but the header on the document made my blood freeze. 1999 Psychiatric Evaluation Report. The patient's name was Isabel's mother. My mom sent me, Kyle said, his legs shaking. If you just give up the controlling stake in the Cleveland project. Lily, in my arms, suddenly turned her head and said in a clear, tiny voice, Uncle, your phone is recording. Kyle's face went white. Before he could react, Lily held up her kid's smartwatch, and Lorraine's sharp voice came through the speaker. Show him the document. Get him to talk. It was followed by the distinct click of a lighter. The woman was smoking in the hospital hallway. Tell Lorraine, I said, snapping Kyle's phone in half, that the fine for smoking in a hospital is $500. That night, after putting Lily to bed, I video chatted with Isabel. She was in her father's hospital room, the rhythmic beep of the machines a somber backdrop. On the bedside table, next to a share transfer agreement, lay the string of sandalwood prayer beads her father never took off. Dad's awake, Isabel said, turning the camera to him. The old man's cloudy eyes focused on the screen. He wants to see Lily. My father-in-law shakily raised a hand and tapped out Morse code against his oxygen mask. I'd taken a cryptography class in college. The short and long taps spelled out 3 words. She is here. A chill ran down my spine. On my own monitor, the feed from Lily's Lego camera suddenly swiveled to face the window. There was nothing there, but the fresh snow outside was disturbed by 2 long drag marks, as if someone had crawled on their knees. Isabel, my voice was tight. How did your mother die? The video feed cut out. 30 seconds later, I received an encrypted email. The attachment was a grainy security video. A hospital room 20 years ago. Isabel's mother was wriggling out of restraints and crawling toward the crib. My father-in-law stood in the doorway, clutching that same string of prayer beads. The beads are crying. The absurd thought came to me as I was trying to get Lily back to sleep. At 3 a.m., she had woken up screaming that the beads are crying, and I did hear a faint electronic whine coming from the Lego camera under her pillow. I took the Lego apart. Inside was a micro receiver playing a looped recording of an old, garbled conversation. Lorraine, stop. A woman's weak pleas were interspersed with a baby's cries and the clacking of prayer beads. It was a recording of Isabel's mother's final moments, hidden inside a prayer bead for 2 decades. In the morning, the kindergarten called to say Lily had a fever. When I burst into the nurse's office, she was trying to jam a thermometer into the computer's USB port. The screen showed the login page for Sterling Enterprises' internal network. "Mommies," she said, her cheeks flushed with fever, but her voice clear as she recited Isabel's birthday. Birthday is the key. The system logged in. I felt a chill spread through my entire body. On the screen was the complete forgery record for the psychiatric evaluation. Isabel's mother had never been sick. Lorraine had bribed a doctor to create the file. The final encrypted document was a childhood psychological evaluation for Isabel herself, post-traumatic stress disorder with associated dissociative amnesia. My phone began vibrating uncontrollably. A flood of messages from Isabel. There was a listening device in my dad's prayer beads. Lorraine tampered with my mom's for. "Is Lily safe?" The last message was a photo. Isabel, standing in front of Lorraine's apartment building, holding a can of gasoline. The snow in Cleveland kept falling. I rushed to the airport, holding a sleeping Lily, her feverish forehead pressed against my neck. Just before we boarded, Isabel's voice, terrifyingly calm, came through the Lego camera. "Ethan, you remember that time I cut my wrist?" "I remember all of it." As the plane broke through the clouds, Lily mumbled in her sleep, "Don't cry, Mommy." The sun through the window caught on her eyelashes, making her look just like the childhood photos I'd seen of Isabel. I suddenly realized that all this time, we had just been trying to heal the broken children inside of each other. A flight attendant offered me a drink. Lily's eyes snapped open. "Daddy, Mommy fixed the beads." She held up her smartwatch. The screen showed Isabel's GPS location, not at Lorraine's apartment, but at the abandoned site of the old asylum. When we landed, I had a voice message from Isabel. "I found a room my mother was kept in," she said, the creak of a metal door groaning in the background. "There are scratches all over the walls. And my name." I squeezed my daughter's hand. The little girl who'd had her memory erased 20 years ago was now standing on the precipice of the truth. And this time, I wouldn't let her fall alone. 08 The iron gates of the abandoned Blackwood Asylum were rusted red in the rain, like a scab on an old wound. Isabel stood before them holding a black umbrella, its frame groaning in her grip. I followed behind, holding Lily, who was unusually quiet. Her wide eyes were fixed on the peeling paint of the asylum sign. "Mommy's been here," she said suddenly. Isabel's hand tightened on the umbrella handle. I noticed then that she was wearing a beige trench coat I'd never seen before, its hem stained with a dark red blotch, which I later realized was strawberry jam from Lily's breakfast. "You came here when you were 3? I asked, trying to sound casual. In my dreams, Isabel's voice was as light as a feather. Every time I had a fever, I'd dream of this gate. Rust flaked off as she pushed the gate open. At the end of the long hallway, the door to an operating theater was ajar. 20-year-old sunlight filtered through the grimy glass, casting a pattern like prison bars on the floor. Lily suddenly squirmed in my arms. "An auntie is crying," she whispered. A faint sobbing sound that seemed to echo from the empty corridor. Isabel's nails dug into my arm. I could see the edge of a small digital recorder peeking out of her coat pocket, the one from her father's prayer beads. "It's the recording," I said, taking her trembling hand. "The device in the beads is on a loop." But Isabel walked toward the operating room as if in a trance. As the door creaked open, I saw moldy leather restraints piled in a corner and an enforced stand toppled over a dusty bed. The walls were the most horrifying part, covered in a dense web of fingernail scratches, some still flecked with dried blood. "This is where they kept her," Isabel said, her umbrella dropping to the floor. She traced the scratches with her fingers. I was in a crib right there, watching. Lily mimicked her, reaching a tiny hand out to touch the wall. The movement made Isabel recoil as if shocked. She stumbled back into a medical cart, sending rusted surgical tools clattering to the ground. Underneath one of the forceps was a yellowed photograph, a young version of Isabel's mother strapped to the bed, holding an infant Isabel. Her father stood just out of frame, his hand clutching the prayer beads. The date was written in pencil on the back, May 13th, 1999. Isabel's birthday. My father said she had postpartum depression. Isabel's laugh was like a razor blade. Turns out he was the one who was sick. She kicked the tools aside, revealing a loose floor tile. Underneath was a waterproof bundle. Inside was a diary. The cover read Lily's growth journal, in handwriting too elegant to belong to a madwoman. I opened the first page and froze. The entry from May 12, 1999 read, "I found out today he's been embezzling money. Lorraine suggested they forge the books. When I said I'd report him, he gave me a tranquilizer." The following pages were mostly torn out, but the fragments pieced together a horrific story. Isabel's mother was never sick. Her father and Lorraine had conspired to forge the diagnosis. The last intact page read, "Lily is crawling now. He brought the restraints today. I have to get out of here before her first birthday." The writing stopped abruptly, the edge of the page spattered with a brown stain. "Stars!" Lily suddenly pointed at the ceiling. I looked up. The grate of an air vent was loose, its shadow on the floor looking like a distorted constellation. Isabel stood on a stool and reached into the duct, pulling out a small metal box. Inside was a blood-stained wedding ring and half of a baby's diaper, soaked through with dried blood. "My mom escaped through here," Isabel said, pressing the diaper to her chest. "She took me with her." I finally understood why she always broke down when Lily had a fever. On that night 20 years ago, little Isabel had also been sick, and her mother had fallen from the roof with her in her arms. Not a suicide, but a final, desperate escape. The rain began to fall harder. Lily grew restless, her small hand tapping a watermark on the diary. Looking closer, I saw a faded pencil mark. Monitor room 307. The abandoned monitor room was filled with old, static-filled televisions. When I connected a portable battery, one of them flickered to life, playing a horrifying scene. A young version of my father-in-law, saying "begin treatment," as a nurse, Lorraine, injected a struggling woman with a syringe. "No wonder they needed to fake a mental illness," I said, pausing the video. They were covering their tracks. But Isabel was staring at a corner of the screen. A crib had flashed into view for a second, and it was empty. I was left in the room that day. Her voice was distant. My mother jumped alone. Lily reached out and touched the screen, her chubby finger resting on her grandmother's anguished face. "Hurts," she whispered. The word made Isabel collapse, sobbing. She grabbed a stool and smashed it into the monitors. Amid the sparks, the gruesome video continued to play. Her mother breaking free of the restraints, crawling towards the vent, with Lorraine chasing her with a needle. The recording ended with a muffled scream. In the darkness, the only light came from Lily's watch, illuminating Isabel's deathly pale face. She mechanically opened the metal box and took out the ring. The inside was engraved, "Till death do us part," the same inscription as ours. "Ethan," she said, sliding the ring on her finger, "let's get a divorce." Before I could react, she pulled a signed divorce agreement from her pocket. It stated that I would get full custody of Lily and all of her assets, including her shares in the company. This wasn't a divorce. It was a suicide note. "Are you insane?" "It's only fair." Isabel smiled, a terrifying broken grin. "My mother took me with her when she jumped. I should take Lily with me." I slapped her across the face. The sound echoed in the empty room. Isabel's head snapped to the side, a trickle of blood running from the corner of her mouth. But she only smiled wider. Again, just like my father used to hit my mother, Lily burst into tears and threw herself at her mother. Isabel instinctively caught her, the embrace making both of them tremble. I seized the opportunity, snatching the divorce papers and tearing them to shreds. "Listen to me," I said, turning her face to mine. "Your mother fought to get out of here so you could live, not so you could get revenge." Isabel's pupils dilated. Lily, still in her arms, leaned forward and licked the blood from her mother's lip. "Mommy, be good," she said. The action was like a switch being flipped. Isabel's tears finally came, a torrent of grief that made her shudder so hard she could barely hold our daughter. We all sank to the dusty floor together. Lily crawled in her lap and used her own sleeve to wipe her mother's tears. "No cry, no cry." The rain had stopped by the time we left. The setting sun broke through the clouds, casting a red glow on the rusted gate. It looked less like a wound now and more like a healing scar. Isabel put the diary in the metal box in her trench coat pocket. Why did you choose me? She asked suddenly. Because I liked the way you held your cigarette. I lied. And you hit hard. She chuckled, the movement pulling at her swollen lip. Lily walked between us, holding both our hands. She looked up and declared, "Go home." In that moment, it felt like the fates of 3 generations of women had finally come full circle. The hell Isabel's mother couldn't escape, Isabel was now walking out of, holding her daughter's hand. That night, my father-in-law's lawyer arrived at our door with a thick stack of documents. On top was Lorraine's signed confession, and underneath that, a share transfer agreement. He was transferring his 51% controlling stake to his granddaughter. The chairman said. The lawyer hesitated. He's turning himself in tomorrow. Isabel was trimming Lily's nails. The scissors slipped, nicking our daughter's finger. Lily just giggled and smeared the blood on her mother's cheek. Mommy's painting. The drop of blood seemed to trigger something in Isabel. She grabbed the documents and ran into the study. Half an hour later, she emerged with ink-stained hands and slapped a new agreement on the coffee table. She had transferred all the shares to me. I won't let my daughter be a puppet, she said, her eyes blazing. You'll be her shield. I flipped to the last page and laughed. An additional clause read, Ethan Hayes is forbidden from remarrying for the duration of his life. Violation of this clause will result in the immediate nullification of the share transfer. It was more of a curse than a legal document, but made my chest feel warm. As I signed, Lily toddled over and pressed her jam-stained hand onto the signature line. Next to the red handprint, Isabel drew a crooked heart with her lipstick. Late that night, I was woken by a faint sound. Isabel was not in bed. A light was on in the study. I pushed the door open to see her installing a new recording device into the prayer beads. On the table were the torn pages of her mother's diary. Write a letter to my mother for me, she said without looking up. Where should I send it? Burn it. Send it to heaven, she said, flicking a lighter. The flame illuminated her bruised face. And pre-order a private room in hell for Lorraine. I put my hand over hers. The recorder was already on. I could hear our conversation playing back, with the faint sound of Lily mumbling in her sleep in the background. Isabel threaded the prayer beads through the band of my watch. When Lily turns 18, let her listen to this. Listen to what? Listen to how we learned to grow flowers in the ruins. She leaned against me, the metal box in her pocket pressing against my chest. The moonlight shone on the desk, on the 3 objects laid out, the blood-stained diaper, the photo from the operating room, and our wedding picture. Lily started crying from her room. We both stood up, but Isabel was faster. Through the crack in the door, I saw her kneeling by the crib, fanning Lily with the pages of her mother's diary. The yellowed paper created a gentle breeze that stirred the fine hair on our daughter's head. The love that couldn't be completed 20 years ago was now, in its own broken way, continuing.